A few years ago, I watched Smithereens at sort of a turning point in my life when I moved to Minneapolis and for the first time was pretty much all by myself, just trying to figure out my life, which made the story of Ren, a young woman in the big city of New York trying to find her place, interesting to me, while her fairly small cast of surrounding supporting characters also mirrored people I met recently in my life and in my travels around that time. When I initially saw the movie, I thought it was pretty good, but I expected to move on from it fairly quickly, as I was watching a couple films per day at that time, and I figured it was just a decent film, but one that would be overshadowed in my mind as soon as the next really decent film came along, as often happens. However, over the past several years, the movie has really stuck with me in my mind and has grown to become one of my favorite films of all time. The film was released in 1982, being directed by Susan Sheldman, a director who has worked here and there for the past 4 decades, having started with this film, but who went on to make a lot of different films and television projects, primarily focusing on women, working on notable projects such as Sex and the City early in its run, She-Devil with Meryl Streep, and Making Mr. Right. What I think is kind of interesting about her career is that you can kind of track her trajectory with the films following her life in a way. Smithereens was made when she was 29, probably having seen the punk scene and other elements from this film firsthand. But you also have Sex and the City, about a group of adult women working and shit with their challenges, which started when she was in her late 40s. And in 2009, she helped create the children's PBS educational show, The Electric Company, which was likely inspired in part by her own child and family. It is a career that is very easily tracked through the decades, and I think that clear growth and changing of interests while maintaining the love of creating is kind of interesting. We don't know a ton about the production, but apparently we know the character of Ren is inspired by Maria from Knights of Cabria, with the film taking some inspiration from French director Federico Fellini. Susan Berman, the star of the film, also had an accident on set that saw her falling off of a fire escape, delaying the productions for 6 months, part of the way through filming after she broke her legs. But thankfully, she was able to finish the film despite the injury, and director Susan Selman's production was put back on track after that 6-month delay. The story of Smithereens is pretty simple. Ren is a young, rebellious woman who is kind of coming to age in the big city after fleeing her prior home of New Jersey, which, of course she wants to flee. It's New Jersey. She joined and became something of a staple of the dying punk scene, which largely moved to the West Coast in California, as the genre left fringe clubs and became more of a commercial staple. Though Ren and several other punk rock fans are still trapped in the city, with the culture mostly drained away from New York and transferred to the almost mythical land of California, at least in the eyes of the people left in these dilapidated New York neighborhoods. The movie starts to take a twist for Ren when Paul from Montana passes through, hoping to explore the big city with his simple country boy attitudes. He befriends and starts attempting to court Ren, but that is when a former local punk legend, Eric, comes into Ren's life. All this context to say that the movie largely follows Ren trying to find her calling in life, trapped between traditional and sweet Paul, who basically wants to marry her after one night of dancing, and punk rocker Eric, who lives the lifestyle she dreamed of, despite part of that lifestyle being deeply baked into promiscuity and really only looking out for yourself, which by the end sees Ren choosing Eric, who leaves her to go to LA with money the duo stole off of a man that Ren was seducing as a way to trap him. Though when Ren heads back to the security of Paul, he too is left for somewhere more quaint, as New York wasn't the life for him. Ren, having burned all her bridges along the way, begins hiking out of New York when a man in a convertible begins catcalling her, though after ignoring the man for a while, she turns around and the film ends with Ren's future and fate up to the viewer's interpretation. The characters in this film are all young people looking for their place in the world, and Ren is largely caught between Paul and Eric, not knowing which man really has the answer to the life she wants to move forward with. Ren, as the lead, almost acts as a chameleon of sorts, seeming often angry and abrasive, having felt really lost in the world after a fallout from her parents, and seeing her sister's domestic life really tainted by the fact that she settled with a man that she dislikes, but puts up with it since that was what was in the cards for her. Ren wanted to rebel from that and ended up in the city's punk scene, a scene that at the time strived off of a sense of independence, indifference, and the idea that it's every man for themselves. Eric in this film embodies the punk rock angle that Ren idolizes, being a punk hotshot in the dilapidated New York streets. When Ren is with Eric, she does things she initially was uncomfortable with, like robbing a man after seducing him or mistreating Paul, who is always nice to her, but isn't as exciting as Ren wants, and won't give up the freedom she desires, though of course that freedom comes at a cost because Eric ends up abandoning her for LA with the money they stole together, a scene that also features Ren meeting Eric's wife, a woman he married a few weeks earlier. Ren is largely impulsive and changes her life plans on a dime, at one point planning on leaving for Vermont with Paul before deciding to leave to LA with Eric. Though one thing I find fascinating about Ren is that you get her apprehension with Paul to an extent. Yes, Paul is more sensible of a person than Eric, but Paul is looking for a fairy tale, fall in love, and have kids romance, which is something that Ren perhaps wants, but also fears more than the unknown. As I said, she came from a traditional home in New Jersey. She fled due to the lack of freedom, and she occasionally sees her sister, who has a lot of Ren's traits, but is stuck in a marriage with a man she openly hates. Ren, as a young woman, is confused, and it's not exclusively the men in her life's fault. They are less of a problem to Ren than they are a representation of the choice she needs to make in her coming-of-age tale. The film ends on uncertainty, though. We do know Ren wants to leave the big city with Eric and Paul, both leaving on their adventures without her. Ren is determined to make it out of the city anyways, seeing its collapse and lack of worth, similarly to how Paul and Eric both expended their time there for their own reasons. One thing I think Susan Seldman did interesting was add some ambiguity, though. We don't know what Ren's plan is. Will she head to New Jersey to try to live with her parents, or will she live somewhere quaint like Paul did? Perhaps she'll continue chasing the punk rock dream that Eric was selling to her. The mystery of what was ahead for Ren compounding with the strange man catcalling her in the film, cutting off with her about to say something to the man, leaves it very up in the open. She could tell him off, take him up on the offer for a ride, but then, what's after that? The film leaves Ren's life, following the film up for interpretation, but I think it was a great ending that makes you think, and it doesn't spoon-feed you the perfect answer. The story at its core is about Ren, a young woman trying to find her place in the world, trying to balance worthwhile relationships with her desired independence, and I think it's a wonderful story that I think was told very effectively. This film is put together amazingly. The film is scored naturally by punk rock music they got off local bands at the time the film was made. Eric was a semi-autobiographical character, with punk rocker Richard Hell being the main professional on the project, having led a number of local punk rock bands to some critical success, with magazines giving him a lot of credit to his contributions in the American punk scene later on. With that said, I think all the actors did a pretty good job, even if many of them were not actually traditionally trained actors. Naturally, with such a small production, Susan Seldman did much of the legwork, editing and directing, while her classmate Shireen El-Kadam shot the film, which I think does a good job capturing the feel of the slums of New York in the early 1980s. This film is very much a film made by women, trying to show the struggle of finding yourself in city life and the difficulties coming to grips with that lifestyle and attempting to grow into something more than they are. Though despite the decidedly female perspective, I can't help but relate to it a bit when I, as a white dude, was living in Minneapolis, going to skeezy bars every night, meeting and dating my fair share of Pauls and Erics along the way, and ultimately deciding the only way I could find myself was by moving to my metaphorical New Jersey. or in my case, my dad's couch. When I first saw this movie, I thought it was an interesting look at the life of a young woman as told by a series of young women. And as my life kept on mirroring the life of Wren's a bit, I think I grew more of an appreciation for Smithereens as not only a cool punk rock film, but also as an important slice of life drama with a lot to say about the human condition and the awkward early stages of adulthood. The film currently sits at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes from a fairly small pool of 7 reviews, with 74 out of 100 on Metacritic. With the movie being fairly small, it's kind of hard to gauge exactly what a wide range of critics would think. Only people who see the film as worthwhile are really going to review it, though critics at the time mostly favored the movie, but couldn't understand why Wren was such a bitch and why Paul didn't have more urgency than he did. I think those are valid complaints, honestly, but I think I saw Paul as more of a functional character, so that never really bothered me in my opinion. Wren being a bitch at times was sort of the point of the film. The film these days is pretty easy to find, with Criterion having released the movie as its 941st edition in their vast catalog. So if you're interested, it is on their streaming service. Otherwise, you can go to any Barnes & Noble or order it off of Amazon. Nothing too hard to track down these days.